welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back to the top of the week in a fresh new episode of It's an Inside Job. I'm your host, Jason Lim. This week, I'm joined by Lauren Rosario Maldonado. She's a seasoned people strategist whose path has been anything but conventional. For a quarter century, Lauren's expedition across the globe has been a masterclass in human resources, leadership coaching, and change management. And at each destination, she's absorbed invaluable lessons in crafting, nurturing, and amplifying high-performing teams. As a revered thought leader, Lauren has dedicated her life to intertwining profound insights with a commitment to crafting human-centered experiences. Her mission extends far beyond the confines of the workplace. It encompasses a holistic approach to enriching lives both professionally and personally. Yet, amidst her remarkable voyage, Lauren sensed the void. It wasn't until she unearthed the transformative force of cultural intelligence that she realized her connections had been superficial. In her latest literary offering, Becoming the Change, the Power of Cultural Intelligence, Lauren uncovers the potential for self-discovery through embracing cultural intelligence. This book, a culmination of multicultural experiences and extensive research, it illuminates the transformative prowess of cultural intelligence in fostering personal growth and understanding, both within ourselves and in the broader world. And so in today's episode, we are going to do a deep exploration of what cultural intelligence is, why it's important, and how does it show up day to day? How can we pragmatically intertwine the skills and knowledge of cultural intelligence in both our private and professional lives? So without further ado, let's slip into the stream and meet Lauren.
Hi, Jason. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to get this chat going.
Definitely. I would like to begin like I do most interviews. Could you please introduce who you are and what you're about?
Sure. I'm Lauren Rosario Maldonado. I am a cultural enthusiast. I am a leadership development a consultant and coach. And I most recently relaunched my consulting practice based on this concept called Cultura Inc. And most recently, I also published my book called Becoming the Change, the Power of Cultural Intelligence, just resulting from my many years as a global HR executive and the experiences that I faced during the times when I was, culturally naive.
What is cultural intelligence as you perceive it?
Oh, that's a great question. The way that I perceive cultural intelligence is this toolkit that helps you develop capabilities to navigate diverse situations more effectively. The academic term relates to understanding, adapting, and engaging with diverse cultures more effectively. But what I have found is that the culture in and of itself is often misunderstood. Many times people attribute culture to ethnic or national geographic attributes, right? But there's a whole different dimension or a wider dimension that applies to culture that many times we don't think about, right? You have functional area culture, you have family and familial culture, you have team-based culture, you have, all these other aspects of culture, subcultures that are unseen yet impact the way that we interact, both in our professional and our personal lives. And so I am on a mission to not only demystify that, but expand perspectives around this notion of culture and how we can navigate it more effectively through understanding.
what inspired you to write the book? Was it a certain incident? Was it a general ignorance as to other cultures, like the minority culture versus the majority culture, depending upon where we are in the world or what region? I mean, what inspired you to kind of put pen to paper?
Yeah, 5 years ago, I was in the middle of my master's program, actually towards the end. This one particular class I was taking at the time was focused around counseling diverse communities.
Hmm.
And in this class, we were tasked with immersing ourselves in different cultures so that we could understand these nuances that often go unseen. Because when it comes to counseling, and honestly, any other interpersonal craft that requires connecting with others and helping them thrive, whether it be coaching, counseling, so forth and so on, you need to have a general understanding of different cultures in order to help your clients navigate better. But what started as an academic exercise led to a really profound awakening for me that led to an identity crisis. You know, I am and was at the time the head of a global HR practice for a multinational organization. And I always considered myself, you know, a learned, well-versed individual when it came to this regard. I mean, service is part of my moral code, right? So
Mhm.
I didn't think anything of it until I navigated all the research required for this class. And up until that point, I felt like my culturally agnostic outlook on life was a benefit because I often felt like I chameleoned my way in, you know, through society and through my lived experiences without necessarily ascribing or feeling like I belonged to any of them.
Mm.
And it led to an identity crisis because part of being culturally intelligent, culturally competent, and both in this lifetime requires for you to have a fundamental understanding of your own history, your own cultural values, and how that plays into your beliefs and how that shapes the way you prefer to exist in the world. And what I found was that this agnostic state was contributing, you know, unbeknownst to me,
Mm.
to biases that I didn't even know existed. And so I was forced to, for the first time, look in the mirror and really dig deep and understand, A, where do I come from? How do these experiences, how does my history shape my cultural values? And how does that contribute in any way, shape, or form to biases that I am not only harboring, but perpetuating through my actions? And you know, that led to a period of a lot of shame. I remember talking to my professor about it at the time because, you know, it was a very profound experience to understand that I was complicit in those ways. And when I wrote my paper, you know, she propelled me and encouraged me to continue my studies,
Mm.
continue on to the doctorate level, and really spread the word about this message because not a lot of people talk about it in this way. And a lot of people don't understand how a lack of understanding of their own history, you know, shows up in these ways. And the more people I told this story to, even though it took me a long, long time to be able to talk about it, the more I was encouraged to write about it, the more I was encouraged uh, to educate others on this because there was not one person that I've told the story to that has not replied with, huh, I didn't even think about that. Or I didn't even know that. I didn't realize that that was always the reaction. And then it came down to not understanding our history enough to understand how it plays a role in our multidimensional identity. that we are more than what you see. We are more than what you hear, right? That there's more to us that shows up in the way we communicate, the way we approach authority, the way we manage time, the way we raise our children, and these values, whether we grew up locally or not, are passed on from generation to generation. And so that's where the idea behind this book came about. I took a while to really grapple with this finding, but at the same time, writing helped me connect and heal at the same time.
So, would you say through the act of exploring and writing the book itself, it was actually a cathartic experience for you to, as you said, heal, to move away from the identity crisis to find more, I don't know, stable ground in your identity? Is that what I understand you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. You understood perfectly. The what started as a journey of informing led to a journey of healing because, when I started writing, I was very heavily focused on my race and ethnic background. I, for example, through this process, realized that I've always identified as white, for example. And when throughout this process, throughout the course, I remember taking the 23andMe
The DNA test.
history, yes.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, my results came back almost 60% Black, African, West African. And I remember feeling, this deep inertia, all of a sudden, that coupled from, with all the research that I was uncovering about, unearned privilege and how that impacts your diversity wheel in society, all of a sudden I started questioning whether the color of my skin was the reason why I had achieved what I had. Whether, all the hard work that I had put into my career, my education was overshadowed and facilitated by the color of my skin. So all of these questions surfaced that really forced me to question my overall existence. And so when I started the process, it was mainly focused on that, on my race, on my ethnic background, on my ancestry. I knew anecdotally about the slave trade. I knew that on both sides of my family. I knew a little bit about colonization, but I did not understand the deeper side of that. Along the way, though, as I immersed myself in diversity, in the diversity of my history, I came to understand that my ethnicity, my history is one part of me, and that there are other shapes, other aspects of my identity that also play into all of this. And so what started as a very myopic view of what my identity is and was at that time, or lack thereof, the more I saw cultural intelligence being that kind of compass that helped me navigate all these nuances and how they shaped not only my identity, but how I prefer to exist. And so I call it a healing journey because through writing and gathering all this perspective myself, I was able to educate others along the way and demystify some of these things along the way, but in a way that was more, less emotional and more educational, more neutral. And what I found was that coming from a place of understanding helped neutralize these conversations as opposed to coming at this from, the holy crap, I'm Black lens, from the race lens, expanding race beyond to all parts of me.
The complexity in that and the different layering in that. Maybe this is a too general a question, but how would you define someone who is culturally intelligent, considering the complexity of what you're talking about and the different layers of values and backgrounds and ethnicity and neighborhoods or countries, what have you? I mean, if we were to look at it sort of at a corporate level where it's multinational and there's a number of people working there, I mean, how would you define a culturally intelligent person?
Fantastic question. From a practitioner, I would say that culturally intelligent person is an explorer. It's somebody that is highly inquisitive and curious, not only about their own history, but also about others and how, they're always using that curiosity to understand. And so they use that understanding to connect better with the person. So in the workplace, you have these varying perspectives on, let's say, how you view achievement. This was a big one for me. I come from a very individualistic, high achievement culture, right? And I was conditioned that way. And working with cultures that were highly collective, I often clashed when I was, pushing for that achievement above and beyond the collective achievement. So pushing for individualized achievement without giving enough attention to the overall cohesiveness of the team. And I want to preface that by saying that it didn't mean that I didn't care about the team, but I didn't understand how, when I was pushing for achievement on an individual level without regard to how people perceive that from me as a leader, what it did was it disconnected me from them as a leader, unbeknownst to me. It was more demotivating to the individual. But because sometimes, depending on the culture, they had a higher regard for authority, let's say, they wouldn't say anything, right? They wouldn't question me on it. They would just, follow. So, thinking back to those moments, I think I was not really motivating in the way I sought to. So organizations that are looking to, kind of simplify this complexity, I would say to start with leadership development in that regard, to equip leaders to understand not only their own cultural values, but how those cultural values permeate their leadership style so that they're more effective motivators. They can help their employees feel more engaged, particularly around this virtual world that we live in today. Communication, help them understand how varying communication styles help kind of bridge all of this together if you are aware of these cultural nuances. To understand that individual you're motivating, right? They may not speak up, but not because they're not assertive, but because they respect you and they hold your position in higher regard. And so you connecting with that individual requires a different type of check-in.
So a cultural intelligent person is obviously someone who has to be quite self-aware of, first of all, maybe of their own implicit biases. Because, I mean, anyone who says they don't have biases, well, I don't think they really are aware of themselves. They don't have too much self-insight. And so we all have sort of biases towards people that may be different from us, however we want to define that. And so that self-awareness is understanding that sometimes a limitation in our own beliefs may be the roadblock to culturally connecting with someone. And I can see the complexity of this in the leadership development. And you mentioned sort of communication. Is that when it comes to a culturally intelligent person, to define someone as a culturally intelligent person, does that mean someone who, as you said, explores? And so that means asking questions based on curiosity and intrigue to try to understand why, maybe move it from position to more needs or wants, understanding sort of the drivers behind why they hold a certain position or why they communicate in a certain way?
Absolutely. They're not only curious and self-aware, but they're also highly humble. The framework in the book highlights cultural humility for a reason. It is a theory grounded on intersectionality. It's grounded on critical self-reflection and awareness, but it's also grounded on this. This requires a continuous effort to develop these skills and to continue to not only explore our impact on others and our ability to respect and connect through all these different intersectionalities, but to commit to a lifelong journey of evolving, of educating ourselves, of learning. And that cultural explorer that I see is culturally intelligent embodies that. You're humble enough to know you'll never have all the answers. Because to your point, we as a society are always evolving. And the values we observe today may look differently tomorrow. They may reference, the 10 cultural value dimensions, but those dimensions and the impact of those will shift over time. We are in the midst of a huge technological disruption phase, right? So how will that play into our cultural values in the future? And so that leader in that organization that's looking to be culturally intelligent is not only aware of their biases and aware of their shortcomings, if you will, but they're committed to taking action on that journey toward understanding and using that with their teams in order to help their teams collaborate better.
Because just to challenge you, I think I brought this up with another guest a little while back. It's in Starbucks. I can't remember where exactly in the States. There were two African-American gentlemen sitting in Starbucks doing whatever they're doing. One of the Starbucks employees thought they were up to something and made a big hoo-ha about this. The police had to come and these black gentlemen weren't doing anything wrong, as I understand. They were just sitting there as anyone else, any other patron. But then Starbucks thought, okay, we need to do some sort of cultural training. And so I think they closed down a bunch of Starbucks. I don't know if it was nationwide. I can't remember. So forgive my ignorance. But it was something. Yeah, it was something like that. But for me, when you drive that kind of, okay, let's have a workshop on cultural sensitivities and such and understand. For me, I see that's almost, I understand the intention is noble, the intention is good, but I see it as almost creating even more tensions. Now we become even more awkward, even more uncomfortable. It's like, okay, I don't want to say anything because if I say something to this person, though, they're going to think I'm a racist or I'm a chauvinist or I'm an ist of something. And I think it just widens the gap. Again, that's my perspective. I was wondering, with your deep knowledge and experience, can you maybe educate me? Am I wrong or am I completely off? Or
no, you're not wrong. And this is why they say, the road to hell was paved with good intentions, right? Because they wanted to be, they wanted to address the issue, acted quickly, in my opinion, too quickly, without understanding the context in which we found ourselves, particularly at that time. And this is what happens when organizations try to address complex issues, whether it be, sociopolitical, environmental, or all of the above, using blanket approaches like a workshop, one, training. This is a continuous journey, right? This is understanding how your organization is positioned to understand these nuances and equipping the employees not only with the awareness, but the actionable and practical tools to use to navigate those situations. And that requires a continuous approach towards developing these skills in employees. Because guess what? We have been conditioned to avoid the uncomfortable, especially in the workplace. We have been conditioned to not talk about it. And this goes above and beyond race, which is in Starbucks' case was the issue at hand. But disability is another one. Ableism is another one. Ageism is another one. All the isms, right? Yeah. We have been conditioned in the workplace to avoid talking about these subjects, as opposed to doing the opposite, right? Driving awareness and providing the actionable resources and tools that helps employees have these uncomfortable conversations in a very humble, honest, and transparent way. It doesn't mean that because I have psychological safety, I'm free to offend you, right?
No.
But it does mean that I have to understand a little bit more about your lived experience so that I can coexist while preserving my own authenticity. And that's where the complexity comes from. It's unraveling all these years of, not talking about it, to really opening the door to more candid conversations that are respectful, honest, and humble.
I like that, what you said is respectable. I mean, it's being firm but fair. It's being diplomatic but direct. But because, mainly this is the North American thing. I come from Canada originally, and you can see it across the Canadian society where you have this, for lack of a better term, this wokeness. I understand when it first started, it had positive intentions, but it's gone way off the rails. I mean, it's completely gone crazy. And just because someone says something, they get offended, and then it becomes this I don't know, a tumultuous storm, and then it just divides people. And I think cultural intelligence, what you're talking about, this is the connective tissue to bring us back to have dialogue. But in organizations, I don't see it so much here in Scandinavia, but it's coming. It's coming. But I think more of the sensitivity is even more in North America. And if we're constantly worried about someone saying you are an ist or this, that means we can't have frank conversations. As you said, respectful conversations, but to have those hard conversations. And what does that create? Well, that creates teams and organizations that are fragile and brittle because we can't address it, because we're afraid we're going to be labeled something and then everyone's going to shun us, right?
Right.
And so... And I can understand the complexity of what you talk about and the training that is needed, because what I hear is it's not just a one workshop kind of thing, but it has to be embedded literally into the culture, right? Cultural intelligence has to be built into
the strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
Not even the culture. It has to be part of your business strategy, because it's not just your employees, it's your customers, right? It's your vendors. It's your supply chain providers, right? Because sometimes the offense is coming from that side. So it's important to, make sure that, yes, we're having these conversations, but they are for the purpose of growing the organization, not for the purpose of, enabling the wokeness, because to your point, it can go to extremes. We have a continuum for a reason. And the point is to remain as, essential as possible along this continuum. We're never going to cover everything. That's unrealistic. And we're never going to fix this, but we can mitigate There's a difference. The approach should be not to change people, to allow the safe space without being reactionary, while at the same time, once the knowledge is provided, you have to tell people how to use it. You have to educate them on how to use it effectively. And that's where the work comes. One of the things that I like about cultural intelligence is exactly that. It provides, this neutral space where you have this framework and you're almost applying like a design thinking approach to all these situations, right? How is that end user going to feel or experience? What will they experience once I have this exchange, once I release this, solution, product, or conversation or context, and then work back from that. It's not going to solve the world's problems. It's not a magic wand, but it's certainly a tool that helps people understand. And one thing I've learned from all my years, particularly in human resources, is that conflict is many times fueled by a lack of understanding.
In part one of my conversation with Lauren, she delves into the essence of cultural intelligent individuals, defining them as an explorers driven by curiosity to deeply understand and connect with others. She emphasizes their ability to balance the individual and collective perspectives, recognizing how cultural values influence leadership styles and the ability to motivate others. Cultural intelligence involves a keen awareness of one's biases, coupled with the humility to continually learn and evolve beyond preconceptions. An essential aspect highlighted is the varied communication styles a culturally intelligent person employs, understanding their impact and effectiveness. However, Lauren notes the shortcomings of traditional cultural sensitive training. She views it as counterproductive, often oversimplified and lacking context, leading to discomfort and avoidance, rather than constructive dialogue. Instead, she advocates for a more nuanced approach, equipping individuals with not just awareness, but the practical tools to navigate these complex cultural situations. Our discussion confronts the tendency to evade uncomfortable conversations and stresses the need for actionable resources and tools to facilitate these discussions. Lauren underscores the importance of creating safe spaces for dialogue. She emphasized the necessity for education on how to effectively utilize these spaces without reactionary responses. The focus is on fostering an environment of humility, respect, honesty, and transparency in order to enable constructive engagement. So now let's slip back into the stream with part two of my fascinating conversation with Lauren. As you said, you've got years of experience working in multinational companies and obviously the multicultural companies. When I don't have as much experience, I don't have the depth and PhD such as yourself, but from my own practical experience working in multinational companies as a consultant or as a coach coming in, trying to get teams to work, I found one of the easier, take that with quotes, but one of the more easier ways of creating harmony, but still having constructive conflict and psychological safety and all those elements, of course, is to move from cultural norms to find that particular team's bespoke team norms. Like, how are we going to engage? The reason I find this so interesting because my father's Chinese and, obviously the Eastern and all the hierarchy and everything there. But then my mom's from the Western world, Caucasian and very driven for an individual. And so growing up, there was this, the clash of different values. But at home, we had a family norm of how we engaged, right? Mm. And it would be different on how, if I was with a Chinese family celebrating whatever celebrations, or if it was with the British and the Scottish side of the family, it'd be different, right? We'd bring out different norms, right? But finding team norms, is that some way of kind of bridging or trying to encourage cultural intelligence?
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. And that's a great example, right? Because family is a great analogy for how to form teams in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And, I not only witnessed that, but also sought to cultivate teams that were culturally intelligent even before I knew what the term was, to come from a place of understanding and be people-centered in that regard. Clashes came, of course, when, confronted with teams who didn't necessarily have those team norms. But you're right. Leaders can cultivate this within their own teams, particularly in multinational organizations. And I would go as far as to say that this extends beyond the multinational organization, because we have organizations that are, local and regional that also face this phenomenon, and the same would apply there. I always go back to leadership because they are the drivers. They're the drivers of this, of these norms, of this cohesiveness, and above and beyond what the organization does to cultivate culture, leaders are steering the ship.
How does a leader begin launching a cultural intelligence amongst his or her leadership so they can cascade it down? I mean, is it a very complex process? Is it some easy baby steps we can take? I mean, from your experience working with corporations, what would you suggest?
That's a great question, because it's tough, isn't it? It's about to get tougher. And I would say it starts with the leader themselves. Before they can get to the team, it starts with them understanding their own CQ, right? Looking in the mirror first. Before you can mention it to your team, but before you focus on your team, start with yourself. Understand your own cultural values and how that shows up for you and how you prefer to live and approach work and family life and everything in between. And once you really understand that, then you can move towards creating that understanding with your team. If you don't do that within yourself first, you can never cultivate it in your team. And then connecting it with your team, once that prerequisite is done, understand how you can continue to integrate this with your team, right? If you're looking at this from a change management perspective, who will be impacted? How will they need for you to communicate? What are the cultural influences that show up for your team when you are communicating? And what do they need to understand how important this is for them as they interact themselves and with other areas? And these three steps can be followed, reiterated over and over again, as long as it's combined with action, right? Then you can be aware and understand your cultural values. But if you don't apply that knowledge by taking action with yourself and by integrating it with your team, it's just going to stay here. It's never going to help you make an impact in any way. And that takes a choice, right? Because what's the alternative? Why lead teams in the first place?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we are judged by our actions and not by our thoughts. We can have all the great thoughts, but if they're not put into, as you said, applied knowledge, then, it's just great ideas collecting dust, but it's the actions that we get measured upon. Your book it goes into great depth in multiple chapters and such. But if I was to force you and said, okay, Lauren, you have these clients here, you can only give them one chapter. That's all they have time to read in your book, and you had to pull out one chapter. What would be the most important chapter you'd say, read this, understand this? And why would that be the most important chapter for a leader or a team or whoever to absorb?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I would say if you're that leader who has zero time, just go straight to the playbook. I explained there why the choice framework is there and why it's important. not only in leadership, but in everyday life.
Mm.
And the reason why, this chapter is important is because it breaks down the different actions you need to take in order to, to make that choice, to use cultural intelligence in your life, both personally and professionally. So that's the one chapter I would say highlights the
Playbook.
entire playbook.
Go to the playbook. Yeah. And again, that's very nuts and bolts, very action oriented. And when we're judged on it's applied knowledge, as you said, very interesting.
Why? And, leaders, there's no time. I've been there. I am there. There's no time. You're pressured from the top, from the bottom, from the side, from outside, from inside, from all sides. And it always comes back to that choice. Always.
There's a lot of, obviously, like any generation, there's a lot of young leaders coming up through the game, and they just have a natural motivation to want to improve, to want to do something, and especially when they move into their first leadership role. They're looking at psychological safety and how to give feedback culture and all those elements. If a young leader's looking at thinking, what Lauren is saying is really resonating with me, and I see there are certain tensions that I'm inheriting from this group because I haven't hired them. They're legacy people. They're people I've just got from another manager. And I want to score some early wins. I want to create more connective tissue and cohesiveness in my team. How long? I mean, as you said, they would have to have some sort of personal coaching by you or someone with cultural intelligence to reflect. But for that leader, him or her, how long does it generally take from your experience for them to kind of get the foundational stones in place so they can start a process of working with their team?
Yeah, they're in that different stage where you're so full of uncertainty, right? You're starting out and you're eager and motivated, yet you have all these forces that are, seemingly working against you. So I would say that leader, assuming they don't have much time either, give me 30 days and we'll get you somewhere. Because at the end of the day, you're already motivated. You just need practical insights to help you navigate those differences.
And so, okay, let's say I'm that leader. I'm curious. I'm like, Lauren could really help me here with her knowledge, and she's got a PhD. She's written a book about this. I mean, what would the process look like if I was to hire you, to bring you in as a consultant to really speed things up, to act as a catalyst, to get things really going? And I'm really motivated because I know my team could really come together and to stop all this sort of infighting, however it is. And I know some of it's cultural because some may be of engineers or some may be this or that. Can you walk us briefly through a process that you might take someone through?
Sure, of course. We start by assessing your leadership skills. That's very important. Assessing, how others view your leadership skills. So that 360 and individual leadership skill is the first step. From there, we extract your top 3 goals that will make the maximum impact, whether it's improving communication, team engagement, or motivating others. Whatever your top 3 are is what we'll focus on. And then we craft an action plan around those top 3 goals, creating what I call moments that matter. What are these moments that matter that you need to cultivate in order to drive the impact you want to have? And so we check in regularly, but we always go back to tying it to those top 3 goals. And then at the end of the 30 days, we assess where we started from and go from there.
And so would that require me as a personal leader, having you as a coach where I would meet you so many times a week? Or, would we be discussing some of the day-to-day challenges I have?
Yeah, we can meet. It's best to meet once a week because you have to give the person an opportunity to apply these things in the middle of sessions. Any more than once a week is much. Sometimes they'll choose to meet every other week. Those are longer engagements. But typically, when I coach an individual, it is once a week. If it is an organization and it's a longer engagement, then we meet every other week.
Yes.
And in between, they can choose to check in. I really do believe that people are not only they multidimensional, but they really are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. So the whole point is not to tell them what to do. The whole point is to bring awareness to, their values and how they lead best, so that they themselves can apply this and drive their achievement of their top 3 goals. And so in between, the check-ins are more clarifying questions if they need. And once we meet for our sessions, then we go into the learnings that happen in between, or any clarification that they need. Sometimes they'll need what I call, process check-ins, where they're trying to, process new learning as it's being contextualized.
Yes.
Those are more, clarification sessions that drives the learning for the individual. But once they go out there and apply, now you're creating, I create more of an experiential learning approach, if you will. So the process is the same. The length of time differs, whether it's individual coaching or coaching for organizations.
Okay. That's brilliant, because sometimes, people want to know the nuts and bolts and what the process is, right? And how long it's going to take commitment wise. So I think you articulated that very well, because I have a lot of listeners who will be kind of grinding and thinking about this. I have a little more of it's a little of a weirder question, but if you could talk to someone about your book, alive or dead, who would that be, and why would you want to talk to him or her about it?
Ooh, great question. I love going back in history, and there's a few people in history that I would love to talk cultural intelligence with. For example, I would love to talk to Socrates all day, every day, especially about something so complex that he saw so simply, right? What do you think about cultural intelligence? I'm pretty sure that conversation will be quite interesting for me.
Yeah, I think any of the great philosophers, Marcus Aurelius would have been a good one to
Marcus
speak to.
Aurelius.
Any of the Stoics. I think a lot of the Stoics.
Yeah, the Stoics. I've come to learn that I am a Stoic. I didn't think so in the beginning, but I am, and Henry David Thoreau is another one. Gosh, I would love to hear what he has to say. He'd probably tell me, don't get lost in the weeds.
No, but I know the book's been launched. The idea of cultural intelligence could have been, used in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, and the decades to come. But do you see, how can I phrase this question? Do you see there will be any more evolution to cultural intelligence that you may have not addressed, that may come due to AI or anything like that? I know it's a very vague and open question, but I was wondering.
No, but it's true. Yeah, it's true.
I mean, are there aspects that you feel that, I should have covered that more in the book or in my next edition?
Absolutely, because, the book was never meant to be an expert book for academics by any means. It was really highlighting how multidimensional we are, how our cultural values influence everything that we do, and how not just myself, but people who were using the power of cultural intelligence, even without knowing what cultural intelligence was. So I do think there'll be not only other additions, particularly as we have these younger generations joining the workforce, but you mentioned AI, right? We're constantly evolving this. I just completed a fellowship with a group of fellows who also have additional insight to add. So I 100% believe that this will continue evolving, and it will mirror society, right? Because we are constantly evolving. And I do agree with you. I wish I would have had CQ, gosh, early in my career. My husband and I talk about this all the time. We wish we would have had this in the beginning of our relationship. But yes, I think it will continue to evolve. And even this book, it will morph into more experiential stories from people who, are living it, from myself and other different applications that I've been playing around with, particularly in my dissertation. So definitely, yes.
Definitely. Well, that sounds that because for me, I think it's an ever evolving. It's an iterative process. As more things come online, the more things we think about, and the more broad and the dynamics and the whole context of cultural intelligence, I think it'll just expand in its definition. But I think it's also important that we, as you've done in the book, it's identify the fundamentals, work on the fundamentals, and then at the end of the book, you have the playbook. It's pragmatic, it's tools based. And I think at the end of the day, if we can paint a picture, if we can see the picture in our heads of what we want to try to achieve, it becomes so much easier for us to make that sojourn, to cross that finishing line. And I think your book has, well, obviously it's laid the foundation and the road map for that. So congrats for that. I'm just very respectful of your time, Lauren. As we come to the top of the hour, is there any last advice, suggestions, or comments you would like to leave with my listeners today?
Yeah, I know it sounds complex. I'm not going to sit here and say it isn't, but we can simplify it if we just make a choice. Make a choice to look in the mirror, use what we learn, and apply it. Sounds simple. It can be hard, but you can simplify it if you just start with yourself and understand the depths of you and use that understanding to understand others.
But Lauren, thank you very much for sharing your experience, your time, and opening up your vulnerability with your identity crisis right in the book. I think a lot of us will probably have that when we start doing a little deeper dive into ourselves and understanding the drivers of where we've come from.
Yeah, and I would encourage you not to let that crisis deter you, right, from making the choice. I would encourage you to push through it, use it, and transmute it into the fuel you need to become the change.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Well, folks, that was the highly engaging and fascinating Lauren Rosario Maldonado. And she is the author of the book, Becoming the Change, The Power of Cultural Intelligence. So as we conclude this insightful conversation with Lauren, we've explored the depth of cultural intelligence and its profound impact on personal and professional interactions. Her perspective has shed light on the essence of being a culturally intelligent individual. And that's someone driven by curiosity, capable of bridging the gap between individuals and the collective, the team, and acknowledging the pervasive influence of cultural values on leadership and communication styles. We've also learned about the limitations of conventional cultural sensitivity training and the necessity for a more nuanced and practical approach. Lauren emphasizes on providing actionable tools and creating safe spaces for uncomfortable conversations. And this resonates deeply, highlighting the importance of fostering humility, respect, honesty, and transparency in our interactions, in our communications. Folks, as we step away from this conversation, Lauren's wisdom prompts us to continuously strive for growth, embracing discomfort as a pathway to understanding and connecting. And Lauren, I'd like to send you my personal gratitude and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your experience with us today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I pulled a lot from it, and I hope, folks, you found the same. I would highly encourage you to pick up her book, Becoming the Change, The Power of Cultural Intelligence. I will be sure to leave all the links to that book in the show notes and the contact information to Lauren. Well, here we are, folks, crossing the finishing line of yet another episode. Well, folks, I'm always interested in hearing your feedback, your comments, your questions, what you've learned. how this episode or other episodes have helped you. You can always reach me at mindtalk.no. Well, folks, until we continue this conversation next week, thank you for allowing me to be part of your week. Until then, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.